When police entered an abandoned farmhouse deep in Boone County, Arkansas, they thought they'd find just dust and cobwebs. But instead, they found a wedding dress, 2 skeletons holding hands, and a diary that began with one chilling line: "My son was born to be my husband." Tell me one thing. Have you ever seen a place so quiet it feels like it's watching you back? And if you're watching this at night, maybe turn the lights on. Don't forget to subscribe and like this video, because what you're about to hear is one of Arkansas's darkest, most forbidden family secrets. They called it the Vanderson place, a sagging old farmhouse buried behind thick pine woods in Boone County, Arkansas. For decades it stood untouched, its windows boarded from the inside, its walls whispering stories no one dared to repeat. Children in the nearby town used to point toward it at dusk, saying if you listened closely, you could hear faint piano music coming from within, soft, sad, and horribly out of tune. No one knew who still lived there, or if anyone did. But one winter evening in 1932, hunters reported a strange glow coming from the barn. When police arrived, the air around the farmhouse felt heavy, as if something unseen was pressing down on them. Inside, they found every piece of furniture covered with white cloths, like ghosts frozen in place. The mirrors were cracked, and the smell of wilted flowers lingered in the air. Then came the real discovery. In the corner of the main room sat a wedding chair, a lace veil still draped across its back. Beneath it, a small mirror had a message carved into the glass: "Only pure blood lasts forever." They followed the scent of decay to the barn. The doors creaked open to reveal 2 skeletal figures lying side by side, still dressed in tattered wedding attire. Her veil was perfectly preserved, wrapped around his arm. Her skull rested. Long before the farmhouse turned to rot, the Vanderson family ruled a small piece of land in the Arkansas hills, proud, private, and strangely untouched by the world outside. They were farmers, preachers, and in their own way, believers in something much older than Christianity. Generations lived and died within the same walls, and for as long as anyone could remember, no Vanderson ever married outside their bloodline. Eleanor Vanderson was born in 1893, the only daughter of Samuel and Ruth Vanderson, a couple who were already second cousins. From childhood, she was told that the purity of the blood was sacred, a divine gift that set their family apart. Her mother would whisper at night, "The outside world corrupts. Our kind must remain clean." When Eleanor turned 16, her father died, mysteriously. Some said fever, others whispered something darker. Ruth locked herself inside the farmhouse for months, and when she finally emerged, she made Eleanor promise, "You will never let the bloodline end." But the promise became a curse. As Eleanor grew older, she found herself increasingly isolated. Suitors from nearby towns were all turned away. People began calling her the Ghost Bride because she always wore white, even after her mother's death. Alone and haunted by the family's old beliefs, she began writing. Notebooks filled with strange theories about divine genetics and the eternal purity of flesh. By the time she reached her 30s, Eleanor's sanity began to unravel. Locals claimed they saw her wandering the fields at night, whispering to someone unseen. When a traveling preacher came through town and asked her about her faith, she only smiled and said, "Faith is in the blood." In her journals, investigators later found drawings, family trees that circled back on themselves, connecting generation after generation until the branches formed a perfect, endless loop. And at the center of every diagram, she had written one name in red ink: Thomas. No one knew who Thomas was then. But years later, when she gave birth to a son and named him Thomas Vanderson, the meaning became horrifyingly clear. When Eleanor Vanderson gave birth in the winter of 1915, there was no doctor, no midwife. just the sound of wind howling through broken shutters. She brought the child into the world alone, by candlelight, on the same bed where her parents had died. The nearest neighbors said they heard her crying out, not in pain, but in laughter. She named him Thomas. From the beginning, she claimed he was not born of sin, but of divine design. No one in town ever met the father. When the sheriff once asked, Eleanor only said, "He came from my own blood." The words were strange, but no one dared question her further. Thomas grew up never attending school. Eleanor kept him hidden inside the farmhouse, teaching him from her journals instead of books. She read to him every night. Not stories, but sermons she wrote herself. In one, she described her son as the blood reborn, the promise fulfilled. Visitors who came to the property, a census worker, a traveling merchant, all said the same thing. The boy's eyes were unsettlingly calm, like mirrors that reflected nothing. His features resembled Eleanor's so closely that people joked they looked like twins separated by time. But no one laughed when the child called her bride mother. Over the years, Eleanor's writings grew darker. Her notes spoke of union and continuity. She wrote that to preserve the purity of their bloodline, she must become one with the source from which it came. Locals often saw her pacing the fields at dusk, holding Thomas's hand, whispering things that made the hair on the back of your neck stand up. When he turned 17, the two vanished from town completely. The gates of the Vanderson farmhouse were chained shut. For weeks, faint candlelight flickered in the attic window. Some nights, people swore they heard a woman singing, not a lullaby, but a wedding hymn. No one entered again until the day the house was found abandoned, and the whispers began about what really happened inside. The year was 1932. For almost 15 years, no one had seen Eleanor Vanderson or her son. The farmhouse had grown wild, vines wrapped around its windows, and the road leading to it disappeared under the brush. But then one night, church bells rang from somewhere deep in the hills. The sound drifted into town, soft at first, then clearer, 3 long tolls, like a signal. People assumed someone was holding a ceremony, maybe a funeral. But there were no churches in that direction, only the old Vanderson property. Inside the farmhouse, candles burned in every window. Faded curtains glowed like paper lanterns. Through the trees, a few hunters claimed they saw figures dressed in white, moving slowly toward the barn. At their center was a woman in a long lace gown and veil, and beside her, a man who looked half her age. Inside that barn, Eleanor had set everything herself. The pews were rows of chairs covered with dust sheets, the altar nothing but an old dresser draped with a white cloth. She'd written her own vows in her diary weeks earlier. Blood must complete the circle. I am his beginning, and he is my end. Neighbors reported that the piano began playing on its own that night. No one had touched it in years. Some said they heard laughter. Others said they heard crying. By morning, the lights were gone. The fields were silent. White lilies, freshly picked, were scattered across the farmhouse porch. And on the barn door, someone had painted a crude heart symbol, drawn in a dark red stain. When the sheriff arrived days later, he found the place empty. But on the table, there was a single object, a wedding ring made from twisted strands of Eleanor's own hair. From that night on, no one dared to speak of the Vandersons. The story became a whisper, told only by those who claimed to see candlelight flicker from the barn each year on the same night in October. And if you listened closely, they said, you could still hear the echo of two voices reciting vows that should never have existed. Months after that haunting night in 1932, the townsfolk began noticing strange signs near the Vanderson farmhouse again. Fresh footprints appeared in the mud outside, smaller than an adult's but oddly uneven, as if one leg didn't move quite right. In the early mornings, neighbors claimed they heard a baby crying, though no one had been seen entering or leaving the property for months. When winter came, smoke began rising from the farmhouse chimney once again. People whispered that Eleanor had brought life into the world. But no one dared to check. It wasn't until a traveling doctor stopped by the local inn, a man unfamiliar with the rumors, that the truth began to surface. The doctor had been called anonymously, told to come for a birth in distress. He rode through the snow and found the Vanderson home surrounded by silence. Inside, he found Eleanor pale and trembling, clutching something wrapped in a wool blanket. She didn't speak, only stared with glassy eyes. When he looked down at the child, he nearly dropped it. The baby's skin was ghostly white, the eyes too far apart, and the mouth twisted as if frozen mid-scream. One of its hands had 6 tiny fingers. The doctor never stayed to sign the birth record. He left before sunrise and never returned to Arkansas. Within weeks, Eleanor was seen wandering the fields alone, muttering to herself about keeping him safe and cleansing the bloodline. Locals began finding dead animals near her property, calves born deformed, birds with extra wings. People said the curse was spreading through the land itself. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the farmhouse went silent again. No more crying, no more smoke. Decades later, when the property was auctioned, workers discovered a tiny coffin buried beneath the floorboards of the barn. Inside was the mummified remains of a small child, and beside it, a note in faded ink. He was too pure for this world. The blood could not hold him. Years turned into decades, and the Vanderson farmhouse rotted quietly beneath the weight of time. Ivy crept across its windows. The porch sagged, and the wind howled through the holes in its roof like a ghost trapped inside. But the curse hadn't died with Eleanor or her child. It had only changed shape. By the 1950s, a new family moved into the area, the Halloways, simple farming folk who knew nothing of the land's grim past. The soil was rich, the fields vast, and the price too good to refuse. Within months of settling in, they began to notice strange things. Every night the cows would gather at the far end of the pasture, facing the old Vanderson barn, mooing as if something unseen stood there. The youngest daughter, Ruth, began sleepwalking, always toward the same direction, always stopping at the edge of the property, whispering, "Mama says the circle's not complete yet." One night, her father followed her with a lantern. He swore later that he saw 2 figures standing in the doorway of the barn, their hands linked. One tall and veiled, the other smaller, childlike. They didn't move, just watched. Within weeks, Ruth fell ill. Her skin turned pale and her heartbeat slowed. The local doctor called it a rare blood condition, but the townspeople whispered otherwise. The Vanderson curse found its way back into the veins. When the Halloways finally left, they boarded the windows shut and carved a cross into the barn door. But no matter how many times the property changed hands, something always drove people away. Crops would die in perfect circles. Livestock would vanish overnight. In the 1980s, a local historian digging into the area's records found something chilling. Every family that had lived within a mile of the Vanderson land had at least one member who died mysteriously, usually around October. It was as if the bloodline had stretched beyond tea. grave, spreading through generations like a silent infection, claiming anyone who dared disturb its soil. Even today, locals claim to see a faint light glowing inside that barn on cold October nights. Two silhouettes, standing hand in hand, waiting for someone to finish their vow. By 2019, the Vanderson farmhouse was nothing more than a ruin swallowed by the forest. Its walls leaned like broken bones, its roof half gone. But when a team of urban explorers, thrill-seekers with cameras, stumbled across the site, they had no idea what story they were about to uncover. They entered through the side door, the hinges screaming in protest. Everything was frozen in time. Furniture draped in sheets, a child's toy on the floor, a cracked mirror reflecting their flashlight beams. One of them, a young woman named Mara, began filming. She wanted to make a video called The Lost Bride of Arkansas. But it wasn't until they reached the barn that the real horror began. Among the hay and debris, they found an old wooden box, sealed shut with wax. Inside were dozens of photographs, all sepia, all dated between 1915 and 1932. The images showed Eleanor Vanderson in her wedding gown, standing beside her son. In one, they held hands. In another, they were surrounded by family members, whose faces seemed wrong. Eyes too close, jaws misshapen, smiles that didn't match their eyes. And then there was the last photo. It showed the same barn, lit by candles, with two figures, one tall, one small, standing before a mirror. But the reflection didn't match. In the reflection, Eleanor was holding the child, not the man, and her eyes looked directly at the camera. When Mara uploaded the footage that night, her viewers noticed something she hadn't. In the final seconds, as she turned off her camera, a woman's faint whisper could be heard. "The circle isn't broken yet." Days later, Mara deleted her channel and disappeared. The video reappeared only once, reposted on an obscure horror forum, where users claimed strange things happened after watching it. Photos on their phones warped, faces blurred, and sometimes, just sometimes, they saw a woman in a veil, standing behind them in the reflection. The Vanderson curse hadn't died. It had gone digital. And now, it was watching us. If you made it this far, you've already seen what the Vanderson curse does to those who uncover it. But here's the thing. Their story doesn't end here. Some people claim that every time this video is watched, that same whisper can be heard faintly in the background. The circle isn't broken yet. So maybe you just became part of it. Tell me in the comments, would you spend a night inside the Vanderson farmhouse? Or would you burn the photographs before you ever look twice? And before you go? Like this video if you felt that chill down your spine. Subscribe to my channel, because the next story I tell might just be one you've already heard in your nightmares. And let me know where you're watching from. Some say the curse follows the places that speak its name. Because in the world of forgotten bloodlines and buried sins, no secret ever stays dead.